It was just great to hear from Roger Sutton. I love listening to him, and it actually is quite uncanny. You'll hear some of the things I was going to touch on later, that he chose Nehemiah as a key focus. It's really quite extraordinary. But I think everybody on the call would agree that this is a key time for this city of ours, Bristol. And absolutely, we'll be talking later about a longer term forward vision that we should aim for as church. But what we do in the next 3 to 5 years, I think, is even more critical. And in part, it relates to the next 3 years with Marvin as mayor. It's not just about Marvin, and I'm sure he wouldn't want it that way, but having a Christian mayor does create an ongoing and immediate opportunity that we need to take and run with as church in the city. This is an unparalleled season of opportunity and favour. We have accessibility to and connectivity with the council and other key stakeholders that we've not seen in living memory, if ever. But that season will not last forever. Things may be very different in 5 years' time. We don't know. And what we do in the next 3 to 5 years will shape the future for the city and for the church. And the extent to which any long-term vision we may have turns out to be achievable. Heading off in the wrong direction, doing our own thing, or failing to engage sufficiently to achieve the momentum needed will impact on the ability to achieve any vision. The one city plan, we've already referred to it, first published in 2019, we're now at its third iteration, sets a vision for Bristol. It speaks of fairness, sustainability, equality, hope for all. And in many ways, I think in itself, the document is somewhat prophetic. It speaks of the benefits, the blessings that come through working together, unity to build Bristol as a city of hope. It's a 30-year vision, but with priorities and targets for each year. And as church in the city, we too need a vision to build Bristol as a city of hope. But we need some specific targets and priorities for the next 3 to 5 years that we can all own. Because, over that same 3 to 5 year time frame, we could see up to 100 of the 300 existing churches in and around the city closed down. We might question that. That seems a bit of an extreme statement, but it could become a reality, and many of them in the more deprived parts of the city where one would argue they're needed most. And with the emergence of larger gathered churches, I'm part of one of them, there's been an increasing risk that church at a local community level has become poorer, less connected with those communities and less relevant. But every church is a community asset, land, buildings, people, albeit with relatively small numbers and often elderly in many cases. But what does it look like for church at a local level to be reimagined, to perhaps include housing, to include community space, alongside the conventional church activity, building kingdom communities at the very heart of community? It's entirely possible and is actively being explored in a number of locations across the city at the moment. And it's great to see some of the larger resourcing churches looking at more decentralized local expressions of church alongside central gatherings, very much a both and. And perhaps post-pandemic church may look very different to what it was back in March 2020, but perhaps in lots of ways for the better. Earlier, Marvin reflected on the way that church has come together and delivered over the last 15 months, building on the good connectivity that already existed, but taking it to another level and making a significant contribution. Stu outlined some of those ways in which church has responded around food provision, fostering child welfare, mental health and well-being, and digital exclusion. But what does the next 3 to 5 years look like? Marvin's 3-year term will go very quickly. In reality, it's little more than 2 years. We need to use this time well. And Marvin's challenge in recent weeks has been across 3 main areas. Firstly, to become more embedded in the city. Church can and should be an essential contributor to city recovery and renewal. Secondly, we need to show leadership and to take opportunities to actively engage in the life of the city, to be salt and light. And thirdly, to be joined up and strategic in our response to need, in our contribution to recovery and renewal. And Roger just very eloquently made that point again. And here we are. The book of Nehemiah has been a regular reference point for the city. And again, this morning, and the way the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt in just 52 days. It's extraordinary. How did they do it? Well, Roger reminded us of some of those factors. Well, lots of factors. They started by allowing something of that heartbreak, that allowing God to break our hearts in a way that it breaks his. But crucially, they were obedient. They had a plan. They divided the overall task between them. They released and empowered the people to use their skills and resources. They were joined up and strategic and were determined to see it through. Simple as, in many ways. But it would have been easy for some groups to say, well, this isn't for us, or to go off and do it their way. Well, just because. And what if that had happened? There would have been gaps. They wouldn't have delivered on the plan, and the task would have been unfinished. So when we come to building Bristol as a city of hope, we also need that plan. And we need to divide the task between us as church in the city. We need to release and empower our congregations to use their skills and resources. And we need to be joined up and strategic. Of course, we could choose not to engage or to prefer to do it our way, just because. Now, what might a plan look like in practice? I suggest we might see 3 areas of support that church can provide, building on what is already in place, but doing it in a much more strategic and joined up way. This isn't about reinventing the wheel or starting from scratch. Firstly, we need to meet the needs of the poor, food, debt, etc. It's a biblical imperative, and church is already pretty good at it. Sadly, though, that's where we start. We meet an immediate crisis, but we don't go beyond. We need to do more, because secondly, we can contribute significantly to the housing and employment needs. You're reimagining church, land and property, creating opportunities for training and employability. And you say, well, can we really do this as a church? Can we contribute? Yes, we can. If we're willing to revisit how we release resources in a more imaginative, and I would suggest, biblical way. Thirdly, through providing support and love to families and the vulnerable, supporting child welfare. We've talked about transforming lives for good and home for good. And we have amazing favour with the council. We have the only council in the country that's coming to us and saying, here are the schools in our cities that we would love church to connect with right across the communities. An invitation to go into those schools and to support some of the most vulnerable children. Supporting mental health and well-being. Again, as Stuart has already mentioned, Kintsugi Hope. Supporting refugees and asylum seekers. There's so many ways that we can build on what is already happening and to build scale. And what happens when we do this? And church is seen by the city as actively contributing to recovery and renewal in a coherent and strategic way. Church becomes better connected at the core and across the communities, and we become increasingly relevant. We see people attracted to Jesus and responding to the good news, and the kingdom breaking out across the city. Jeremiah 29:7, and with this I'll end, reminds us that we should seek the peace and prosperity of the city. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. The question is, are we in? Are you in? In many ways, developing a plan for this is easy. The challenge is whether we're willing to be part of it, to own it and to deliver it. My encouragement this morning is for us all to commit to work together with everything that we have as church in this city to build Bristol as a city of hope. Rog, back to you.